Yes, absolutely. Cyber, yes. Computer, no. All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. I really appreciate you being here. I suppose if you're coming to this particular talk, it's because you've got the sense that just maybe crypto's actually kind of cool, but maybe you're put off by the fact that it's just so forbidding to get into it. So what I'd like to do today is I want to take you on a whirlwind tour of about 2,500 years of history in cryptography, and we're going to put some crypto systems into context and make them accessible. I want you to come away from my talk today with a better idea on how to get involved, where to begin, and really just how to approach cryptography in a way that you can think, hey, you know what, I can jump into this, I can do this. Really? What did I tell you? I don't know how to computer. Yeah, no, it's... All right, can we, now, okay. I will use the button. All right, so first a quick note about me. I work in Blue Team for a living. I am a reformed web developer, so I apologize for my sins of the past. Crypto's not really a particular specialization of mine. It's just an area where I've always had a personal interest because in my background, I have a math and computer science degree, and I get into abstract systems, and I understand that most people don't. So I'm also a little bit of a history buff, which meshes with this topic surprisingly well. So let's start at the beginning. You've come to a talk about crypto, so surely you've got some idea in a very broad sense, at least, what cryptography is. So we've got some information that we want to keep confidential. We want to make sure that no one tampers with this information because we've placed a high value on it. We want to make sure that it gets to a recipient unchanged and private from other people. So maybe we want troops to march east and not west. Maybe the assassination attempt needs to occur at exactly 3 a.m. Or maybe I want to buy the Borgias on Blu-ray and not 50 Shades of Grey. So whatever it is, it's a secret of some sort or another. We don't want to just keep it, though, because then I could just lock it in a safe and keep it locked away forever. But no, we have to give it to somebody else, and that's, or else it's not a useful secret. And cryptography is how we do that. So first I want you to meet Alice and Bob. Normally people teaching cryptography will typically refer to Alice and Bob as a model for illustrating different crypto scenarios. A and B are busy exchanging messages, and they're trying to keep Eve from eavesdropping or messing with their notes. And this can be very, very informative, but my God, it makes for some really horribly dry material. We're not going to be speaking of Alice and Bob anymore after this. There's a long parade of brilliant minds who have left their mark on the field of cryptography. They have incredible intellects, but it's rare that we celebrate their stories. It's because these are the faces of academics, of mathematicians, of philosophers. They're men of ideas, and they're known to us for their works, not for their deeds. Because if their work was accessible to us, I'd have nothing to talk about here right now. But these people, these are the people whose stories we've always craved. So today, and by the way, this right here, that's the only Sun Tzu reference in the whole conference, I promise. So today we're gonna focus on where cryptography intersects with history, and we're going to leverage that relationship to give you a cleaner understanding of the basics and kind of get you caught up in the span of an hour to the modern age of crypto and ready to jump in. So let's introduce the families of classic crypto real quick. So up at the top, I've just kind of generalized it. Secret writing is the fundamental concept of what we're talking about. On the left, and under that, you've got two families. You've got hiding the message itself, which is kind of its own small family, but then you also have hiding the content. You might be able to intercept that message, but I've hidden the content somehow. Under that, we've got, on the left, transposition. So that's basically swapping letters around. And a larger subfamily is substitution. And it sounds like the same, but instead of just swapping them around within the message, I'm actually coming up with a system that's going to let me change one letter for another. Now, these didn't all come into being at the same time, so let's explore how the tree grew over time. And that's why our story begins here, in Greece, in 4th century before Common Era, or BC, if you prefer to think of it that way, with Darius I, or also called Darius the Great. And by the way, if you're a fan of the Civilization games, that's this guy. He was emperor of Persia, of the Achaemenid Empire, and he was mighty angry with the Greeks for meddling in Persian affairs on the Turkish coast. In 492 BCE, Darius started an invasion of Greece. It floundered at first, so he tried using diplomacy to get through to the Greeks just how angry he was, and they reacted a little predictably. So he tried again. This time he sacked Eritrea, and then he went for Athens. So the Persians landed at Marathon, which made a nice landing point so they could continue their invasion. And that's where they engaged the Greeks. The Greeks had fewer soldiers, but they fought with superior tactics, and they drove the Persians off and squashed the invasion. This is where we get the legend of Phidippides, who was the herald who famously was who ran from the battlefield at Marathon all the way to Athens, roughly 26.2 miles, to deliver joyous news of the victory, only to collapse and die upon delivering that news. Of course, that's a little bit of a legend. That's not really substantiated fact. But despite the defeat at despite his defeat at Marathon, Darius' campaign in the Aegean was very successful. He intended to return to finish the job, but he died of old age before he could. So it fell to his son Xerxes I to finish the conquest of Greece. But the Greeks were warned of Xerxes' invasion. Sparta had a unique form of government that features dual kings, and Demaratus had been one of them. His lineage had been called into question by one of his rivals, and so he was deposed. He fled to the court of Darius I, where he became an ally of both Darius and his son Xerxes. Demaratus scraped all the wax off of a writing tablet, a folding writing tablet. So if you imagine, just a little portable cabinet that had doors, he scraped the wax off of that and carved his message onto the wood underneath. He had the wax melted and then poured back on, hiding the message. Now, why he did this, we're not really sure. Whether he wanted to gloat or whether he didn't want to see the subjugation of his homeland, we may never know. But nevertheless, he sent this message to Sparta. It was Leonidas' wife, Gorgo, who was the first to realize that there was more to this gift than meets the eye. So she had her countrymen also scrape out all that wax off, and there was the message. Because of this warning, the Spartans were able to muster a small defense force. King Leonidas himself led a contingent of famously 300 Spartan hoplites and less famously about 4,000 other Greek warriors against the much larger Persian army. They engaged the enemy at a choke point at Thermopylae, so that's up here, and engaged in bitter combat there. Xerxes' army prevailed after about 7 days' worth of fighting, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. So historians estimate that the Persians lost about 10-1 over the Greeks. So it wasn't a total victory for either side. After that, the Persians conquered much of northern Greece, but before the Greeks could muster the rest of their defenses. But eventually the Athenians did provoke a naval battle at Salamis, here near Athens, and they were able to claim a definitive victory there. And finally, a massive army of Greek hoplites marched out from Corinth, and they were able to engage the dispirited Persians at Plataea, here, and expelled Xerxes from the rest of Greece. This is a great example of steganography, of hidden messages, and that's our first family of crypto. It's also the weakest form, because its success depends entirely on being clever. This means it's easily defeated by a vigilant enemy, or even sheer dumb luck. The Spartans understood this, and so they wanted to improve on the idea. They wanted more security than that offered. So in Plutarch's biography of the Spartan admiral Lysander, he describes how important and secret messages were dispatched to their commanders. They wound a leather strap around a baton called a scitale, which is pronounced kind of like Italy, spelled like skytail. They would write on that strap of leather, and so then when it was unwound, the message would be scrambled. So let's say this is the message we've received. The spacing looks a little bit better on a PC. This is the message we'd received on kind of a ribbon. So we'd wind the ribbon around the scitale like this. And this is what we would get. We see the letters now line up to spell out our message, which is send more hoplites to Megara, which is a Greek city in central, or it's a city in central Greece. Notice how now that, well, okay, so the spacing on this one messed up. Every fourth character, essentially, lines up now to something on the top line. So by winding it around, we've now rearranged the message and it's readable. The innovation here is to shift from hiding messages to obfuscating the content of those messages. But there's a problem with the scitale. It's a simple machine, but it's frankly too simple. Anyone who knows this technique can unravel the message even without the exact measurements of the scitale. For this reason, the technique never really caught on with Sparta's rivals. But it was honestly the best we have for several hundred years. Up until this guy, Gaius Julius Caesar. In 58 BCE, he was a proconsul at that point, which is it's kind of a provincial governor, and he was deeply in debt. The region we now know of as France and Belgium was in those days called Gaul. So in order to curry political favor and to fill his coffers with the spoils of war, Caesar pressed the Senate to let him command a proactive war against Gaul. And it was a total victory for Caesar. After 8 years of campaigns, Rome would annex the whole territory of Gaul, and this paved the way for Caesar to ultimately become the sole ruler of Rome. Small footnote, Caesar actually never became emperor. It was Octavius Caesar who was the first emperor of Rome. But there are two notable defeats for the Romans late in the war. The first of these was in 53 BCE near Tongres in modern-day Belgium. A legion of the Roman army was wintering, and food was scarce for both Roman and Gaul alike. So under the command of Ambiorix, a Gallic tribe attacked the Romans and fooled them into thinking that a much larger German force was on the way. So the following morning, the Romans rushed to break camp to unite with a nearby legion when they were ambushed by the Gauls and wiped out. Wanting to capitalize on their success, Ambiorix's soldiers surrounded the nearby camp of Quintus Cicero, who was the brother to the noted orator Marcus Cicero. Cicero got a message out to Caesar, who raised 2 legions to come help. But how is he going to get a message back to Cicero? He's surrounded, remember? So he bribed a Gaul to ride ahead with a message that had been written in Greek characters. He was given instructions to throw it into the camp by spear if he couldn't get close. So that's what he did. And it got stuck. And it remained there for 2 days. So much for wartime urgency, huh? Finally, someone saw it, and Cicero learned that help was on the way. While it was feasible that the Gallic leaders might have been familiar with Latin characters at that point in the war, Greek characters would have been altogether foreign to them. This was the first example of a monoalphabetic substitution cipher. That's a mouthful, but it's one of the most basic building blocks of encryption for many hundreds of years. The cipher itself is just a table that maps the original letter, called the plain text, to the encrypted letter, called the ciphertext. Caesar had chosen an incredibly simple symbolic mapping, one that Cicero would grasp instantly, but anyone unfamiliar with Greek would not. If intercepted, it would be indiscernible to the Gauls, who had no contact at all with Greece. While this was a clever improvisation, it would not have provided any security if who he really needed to keep the message from were Roman eyes. Using an abnormal alphabet, or even an invented one, doesn't actually provide any real security. Geoffrey Chaucer added a number of enciphered paragraphs to his work, which had been deciphered without the aid of a key. So that's there on the left. Top left, you can see where that has since been decrypted. Mary Queen of Scots was executed after English spies defeated her symbol-driven code and proved her complicity in a plot to assassinate Queen Elizabeth. And there, kind of middle, next to her portrait, is the key to her code down here. In the modern age, symbol substitutions are really just toys. Consider a couple recent video games. The original Dead Space presented in Cipher graffiti on the walls. A solution could be found in the game, which fans then cleaned up. So if you cared enough about the universe, this was just an extra bit of window dressing for you to enjoy. Indie darling Fez took a slightly different approach. They created an alphabet that used only 6 characters, but the rotation gave all the other letters. It was still fundamentally a monoalphabetic substitution, added as window dressing. And the critical weakness, oh, I forgot to add the key to that one. I actually drew that one out because I'm a dork. The central weakness is right there. It takes time to invent a scheme like this, and once the enemy has the key, it's no better than a regular alphabet. Later in his life, Caesar improved on his method. He used a shifted alphabet. So A will turn to D, B will turn to E, and so on. This became the method that today bears his name, a Caesar shift. So we see here that that method with the plain text on top and the shifted alphabet on the second row. So if he wanted to tell Cicero not to abandon his camp, it would be enciphered thus. This is the same thing as what we today call rotate 13 or rot 13. Rot 13 is actually a special case of a Caesar shift. Since it shifts halfway through an alphabet with an even number of characters, it's symmetrical. A will go to N, and N will go back to A. And in mentioning rot 13, I think it's worthwhile to remember the Adobe ebook debacle of 2001. Elcomsoft, a Russian company that primarily makes password recovery software, noticed that early ebook vendors were using the rot 13 example that came with Adobe's SDK as their entire form of encryption. So that means that a basic text editor would decrypt these rights-managed documents trivially. The developer was actually arrested in the US and charged under the DMCA. In a press release, Apple inferred that the tool he wrote was, and this is a quote here, a determined illegal attack. Thankfully, the court disagreed, and in December of 2002, he was acquitted after a 2-week trial. Caesar's technique was later modified to, I say modified but not improved, to feature a key phrase. A word or a phrase, such as Quintus Tullius Cicero, would be agreed upon by the parties meaning to chat by this method. So if you boil it down to the unique letters only, so you've got that on the second line, and then you follow it with the rest of the alphabet, that's your cipher alphabet. The resulting table is easy to remember, easy to generate, but this comes at the cost of some of the later letters you can see down here. They don't change at all, unless your key phrase has X, Y, and Z in it. So at this point, we've seen most of the crypto families emerge. The foundation has been set, but there's a long gap until we reach a point of maturity with this science. So to move forward, let's take a step back real quick. Have you ever wondered why ancient and classical Greece captures it's so enduring to us? It's certainly not the oldest civilization of antiquity. Isn't it impressive how it still manages to captivate us, impacting pop culture for the young and the old, even millennia after its decline? And the truth is that the great works of the Greeks were almost completely lost to Western civilization. The Romans were well acquainted with the Greeks. They were neighbors. But as the Roman Empire fell into decline, Europe's knowledge of the Greek language declined as well. So when Rome fell in 476 Common Era and ushered in the Dark Ages, many Greek texts that had never been translated into Latin had no future in Latin. So where did we get them from? So in the 8th century AD, CE, whichever, Al-Mansur was the head of the Abbasid Caliphate. He was and this was after the great conquest of Islam had subsided. He founded the city of Baghdad near the conquered city of Ctesiphon. That's a mouthful. Try saying that one 3 times fast. He was also a great lover of knowledge. He founded a library there called Bait al-Hikmah, or the House of Wisdom. This began the Islamic Golden Age, a period in which literature, philosophy, mathematics, and science poured out of the heart of the Islamic world, and his thirst for knowledge instead of conquest was insatiable. Bait al-Hikmah was central to this activity. Here, scholars would bring whatever books they could find in the world back, and they would translate it into Arabic. That love of knowledge was infectious during this period. So in Al-Andalus, which was Muslim Spain, Al-Hakam II also founded many libraries throughout the territory. And he brought Arabic books that had been translated centuries before into Spain. Under his leadership, Toledo in particular emerged as an important intellectual center. So the mathematics and engineering that were taught in Toledo made the great heights of Europe's cathedrals possible. By the 12th century, the Archbishop of Toledo finally founded a school of translators who began translating these books in Arabic into Latin. So for the first time in 7 centuries, Europeans could peer into the minds of a civilization it had never had direct contact with. But knowledge of this history isn't the only impact that the Islamic Golden Age has had on crypto. One of the important concentrations of study at Bait al-Hikmah was the Hadith. Most people understand that the Quran is the primary holy text of Islam. Muslims believe it to be Allah's revelation to the Prophet Muhammad. Its name literally means the recitation. The Hadith, on the other hand, are secondary collections of Muhammad's teachings and sayings. Its content is not seen as directly divine, but it's incredibly important to Islamic jurisprudence. So what that means is when you hear about muftis issuing fatwas, those are formal theological interpretations whose conclusions are based upon the hadiths of whatever sect they are a member of. Hadith come down from oral tradition. So it was important to study the use of language in those records, which were not well dated, to build a chronology of Muhammad's teachings. For instance, he might have taught something today that next week he teaches, not quite this short time frame, next week he teaches something opposite, or he different in somehow. So it was important to know when that teaching occurred. The scholars of Bait al-Hikmah pored over their hadith, noting the frequency of certain words that appeared in the record, and used that to determine where they fell in his life. But they didn't just stop at noting the frequency of words. They also drilled down into the frequency of what letters were appearing in those words. Honestly, when you think about it, this was one of the world's first big data projects. Al-Kindi was a philosopher and a polymath who became a very prominent figure at Bait al-Hikmah. In addition to his role translating Greek texts into Arabic and his reputation for adapting and promoting Greek philosophy in the Islamic world, Al-Kindi was also the father of cryptanalysis. He outlined a technique that leveraged this vast understanding of letter frequency to defeat substitution ciphers. So let me ask you a question. Think about Wheel of Fortune. What are the most common letters in the English language? R, S, T, L, and E, right? Well, not quite, but they're all in there. Anyone know what, if you had to pick, if you're playing the game, what your next 4 choices should be? Well, you only get one vowel, so A, absolutely. I would also go with H, D, C, and A. You can get your frequency data from basically any source. I have shamelessly reused data from a Wikipedia article for expedience.
Hello folks, I'm Geek here. Unfortunately we had a video crash, so the next little bit the sound goes out and the live speaker stops moving, but the slide should continue. If you fast forward to about the 25-minute, 40-second mark, you should get audio again. Sorry for the technical glitch.
All right, there we are. Sorry about that, folks. All right, so now we've got lots of little of partial words. So let's play a little bit of Wheel of Fortune ourselves. We have I blank on line 6. It's lowercase n, fourth word in, right? So we know it's not S, we know it's not N, so probably the lowercase n is going to be plain text F, if, right? All right, on line 1, you've got HI blank H, and on line 2, you've got blank OOD. It's the same letter between them, so probably our lowercase c is going to be the G. Line 1, we have OSITION preceded by a blank, so probably the word position, right? And that's preceded by O blank blank. Out position? Hour. So we've got U and we've got R. So let's step forward. There we go. At this point, all that's left is to clean up the mess. So we can look at each word that's got 1 or 2 letters. Guess what seems reasonable? Fill it in and see how that shakes out through the rest of it. I've done that in advance for us because that'll take a little bit of time. There we go. That's some nice work now, huh? Now, if we take what we've done here with this table and we invert it so that way you've got the plain text on top and you reorder by the plain text letters, you can see that we're using a keyed substitution, a keyed Caesar cipher, and our key seems to be frequency analysis. This technique proved to be devilishly effective, which made life difficult for cryptographers. So naturally, they fought back. So they used null and double characters. So this null character would be one that simply a legitimate decipherer would know to ignore. A double would be something that says, instead of, if you wanted to say good, you would say G-double-O-D instead of 2 O's one after the other. They would use deliberate misspellings or the original leet speak, which threw off the frequency, but when you had enough text, cryptanalysts were able to see through that. You had codes, which is something I've kind of glossed over. Codes at this point existed a long time, and code would be where you would replace an entire word with a symbol or a number. And those worked pretty well, but your vocabulary is limited to what's in your code book. And if I ever steal your code book, then forget about your code. And then there were also nomenclators, which were kind of a blend of codes and a substitution cipher. So they would take a lot of the little words and actually encode those. So instead of doing as we did, we hunted for if and an and as, those words would actually be represented by encoded values. So this is the state of affairs in cryptography for a while, and it's a pretty grim picture. Throughout Europe, monarchs were in the habit of employing their own cryptographers to ensure the security of their messages and defeat the ciphers of their rivals. Encrypted messages became increasingly important to diplomacy, and for that reason, so does cryptanalysis. In the Game of Thrones, you win or you die, and it really, really helps if you cheat. So this is kind of the original blue team, red team arrangement when you get down to in information security, when you get down to it. Finally, in the 15th century, Leon Battista Alberti, who was a Florentine architect and polymath, lit onto a new idea after having a conversation with a friend of his who happened to be the secretary of the Pope. He published an essay introducing the idea of using dual substitution alphabets and alternating between them. So to encipher this message, the first message would come from the C1 alphabet, the second from the C2 alphabet, and on through the whole thing, back and forth. Trevi Fountain, by the way, is one of Alberti's more notable sculptures. Now this introduces some new characteristics into the ciphertext. Double letters are now very misleading. In the ciphertext, you see GG, which you might think would be a double letter in the plain text, but you would be mistaken. And also the double letters coming from the plain text, meet and noon, don't appear doubled in the cipher. Little words are also now harder, so we've used the word at twice in our plain text, but it's not repeated in the ciphertext. This was an important innovation. Using one or more substitution alphabet is a new family of encryption systems referred to as polyalphabetic ciphers. But it wasn't until the 16th century that Blaise de Vigenere built on Alberti's ideas and made a powerful new encryption system with them. The Vigenere cipher protects the frequency of the character in plain text because there's no correlation between the plain text frequency, between the frequency of a character in the ciphertext and the frequency of the same letter in the plain text. So first, let's consider a table that shows all 26 iterations of the Caesar shift. There is nothing secret, and for some reason, a couple of them are like, I'm not sending a coded message there, it's just a glitch. There's nothing secret about this table. If you were to intercept this, I haven't told you anything about the cipher I'm using, other than it's polyalphabetic. So since there's 26 alphabets, let's name each one of them after a letter. Vigenere uses the letter in a key phrase and the letter in your plain text to look up the ciphertext. So let's look at a trivial example. The key is cat, and the text that we're going to encrypt is dog. So first we're going to look up column D in the C row. Hopefully this lines up right. Yay, it does. It's G. Next we're going to look in the O column we're going to look in the A row for the O column. And finally, we're going to look for in the T row for the G column. So our ciphertext is GPA. Now, if you imagine that the Vatican used this after it was published to send a method about Pope Gregory's death, using his predecessor's name, his predecessor was Urban, as the key, we would set it up like this. Since our key has only 5 letters, we're going to reduce the Vigenere table to just those 5 rows. And we will encrypt. So, since this is a 5-alphabet cipher, that still means it's crackable by human without too much effort. It's still difficult, much more difficult than the mono-alphabetic ciphers. So if they announce the new Pope's election using a longer version of Gregory's name, so we're going to say Pope Gregory XIV is the key now, we now have 9 unique alphabets in a looping sequence of 14. This is much harder to crack. If you only have the one ciphertext sample, it's pretty much impossible. As much of a game changer as this was, it failed to start an overnight revolution in cryptography. Another type of cipher was capturing cryptanalysts' attention. A homophonic cipher is one where syllables are encoded into ciphertext instead of words or letters. The court of Louis XIV used this new cipher, and it was so effective that they called it the Great Cipher. They believed it to be unbreakable. To their credit, it survived over 250 years before it was finally solved. The technique nullified frequency analysis because no cultures had the same wealth of frequency information about phonemes. Once someone figured out it was a code of syllables, however, the gig was up. The door was thrown open on all kinds of mid-sized ciphers, such as digraphs or pairs of letters. But cryptanalysts knew about it too. So then frequency data on these atoms started to surface. So from that point on, the security afforded by a homophonic cipher was about the same as monoalphabetic. Okay. There we go. Sorry. Slight hiccup. All right, so let's look ahead now to August Kirchhoff's, a 19th century professor of languages in France. In 1883, Kirchhoff had published a series of essays called La Cryptographie Militaire, and he was a great student of cryptography, and his essays proved to be among the most important works on the subject since Alberti. He understood the distinction between wartime crypto, or the momentary exchange between persons, and diplomatic crypto, security for an unlimited time. He outlined 6 principles for an ideal field cipher design. We'll run through them real quick. Number 1, the system should be unbreakable, in practice if not theoretically. 2, the design of a system, i.e. the algorithm, should not require secrecy. It's the key that matters. 3, the key should be memorable without notes and should be easily changeable. 4, they should be easily transmittable by telegraph, which will modernize to say whatever the technology of the day is. 5, the apparatus or documents you need to actually perform encryption and decryption should be portable and able to be operated by one person. And 6, it should be easy, requiring neither a long list of rules or special knowledge to actually perform these. Mere decades later is when Franz Ferdinand of Austria was assassinated in Sarajevo. So mounting political tensions in Europe ignited like a powder keg, and the European nations coalesced into the Central Powers and the Allied Powers. Yes, I do know that is an Onion headline, but it is, honest to God, one of the most descriptive and accurate headlines I found when looking for a World War I headline. So they matched up and squared off on 2 key fronts. The great powers of the world had brought the full force of their creativity and industry into painting the earth with new visions of hell. Despite the fact that forces were literally entrenched and advances slow and bloody, battlefield communication could save lives. Knowing that a gas attack was planned to precede your company's offensive thrust, for instance, was pretty important. Imagine trying to decipher messages in these conditions, under fire and shelling from the enemy. Kirchhoff's was spot on when he said that field ciphers would be need to be easy to use. And so for that reason, World War I is a study in transposition ciphers. They were popular because of their simplicity, especially during combat. So far from meeting Kirchhoff's first principle of being theoretically, let alone practically, unbreakable, these systems were more complicated. They were still more complicated than the Spartan skitales. First, a key would be issued. A good key should be of fair length, longer than this, but this is for example, and complexity did not matter. Now we're going to order the key letters, first by letter precedence and then by order of appearance. So VA is number 1, TERLA is number 2, and so on. Now we're going to make our grid below our key and write in the message. 3rd Division, stop. Attack at daybreak, stop. Gas to proceed. We're going to write it in, left to right, top to bottom. I've added a couple null characters here at the bottom just to fill out the grid. The ciphertext is a reading of the columns out according to our order sequence. So the first column is going to be HIKAR. Whoops. First column is HIKAR. I've skipped too far. I'm sorry. The second column is ITYSE, and so on and so forth. Now this is a little bit simplistic. So the Germans in practice would use 2 rounds of this. So we'll follow on the last slide, but I'm going to take out those two nulls. They wouldn't have done that in the first round. So they're going to write that first round cipher back into the grid, left to right, top to bottom. HIKAR, ITYSE, and so forth. The Germans would then add a number of null characters equal to the number of words in the key phrase. So here it's just 1, Vaterland. Now we're going to read those columns back out again in the key order. And we've shown it here in blocks of 5 characters for telegraphability. To decipher that message, the recipient is going to divide the number of characters, 42, by the key length, 9. The quotient is the number of full rows they're dealing with, and the remainder is the number of characters in the incomplete final row. So once they know that, they can just reverse the process. This is much more difficult than a single round column or transposition, and but the much superior French cryptanalysts had solved this one very early on. So later in the war, Germany began experimenting with other systems at a chaotic pace once they caught wise to the fact that the French had high visibility into their systems. One noteworthy method they used were turning grills. A message would be sent in a square block, like so. Enemy artillery bound for your location. A couple of null characters added in. They would overlay the key, which would be a grid, and read the letters into the ciphertext. They'd rotate that grid clockwise and repeat until they've come full circle. To decipher, they would just start with the overlay on a blank grid and fill the letters from the encrypted message back into the grid, left to right, top to bottom, and rotate it every time until they filled it up. Perhaps the best-known failure of German cryptography during the Great War was the Zimmermann telegram. In early 1917, Arthur Zimmermann, who was the German Foreign Secretary, sent a telegraph to Germany's ambassador in Mexico, instructing him to offer an alliance to Mexico if the United States enters the war, if they would declare war on us. But that message had been intercepted by the British, whose cryptanalysts had learned from other ciphers they had captured in combat. They deciphered it, they turned it over to Woodrow Wilson, but also the U.S. press. So when this hit the news, public opinion swung sharply in favor of the U.S. entering the war. The British cleaned up by using a neat little trick of misinformation to cover their tracks. They actually blamed the interception on an unnamed traitor in the German-Mexico embassy. The Germans, refusing to consider that their crypto had been undone, bought the story hook, line, and sinker and went looking for a mythical traitor. So by the fall of 1918, the Allied powers had beaten the Central Powers to their breaking point. Germany was facing a mutiny, and their partners, internally a mutiny, and their partners in crime all had surrendered. So Kaiser William II abdicated, and slipped into exile in the Netherlands. During the 20s, the new German Republic finally realized how badly outmatched their crypto was, so they put a task force of mathematicians on the job of securing their diplomatic messages. They experimented with additive ciphers using long keys, so that's using modulus math so it wraps around. So that means that A plus C, 1 plus 3 is 4, D, and that X, 24 plus C, 3, would be A. This works in reverse, too. If you subtract the two letters, if you subtract C from D, you're going to get A. And if you subtract C from A, you're going to get X. So as long as if your key is totally random and at least as long as your message, without repeating, then that ciphertext is completely secure, indistinguishable from a random message. If this is all you ever intercept, you have no chance of ever cracking that encryption. But it's not a perfect scheme. It's only good for, each pad is only good for one use. You can't reuse it. And 2 copies of it have to exist. One with the sender, one with the recipient. That's something that can be stolen or copied, and once that happens, your absolute security is absolutely compromised. All right. I'm running shy on time, so I'm going to fly through this here. Arthur Scherbius also started a company. He's German, started a company in 1918, also with the goal of improving German crypto. He stole some ideas from Alberti. Alberti had first developed a device that comes in a Cracker Jack box called a decoder ring. It was a simple fixed outer ring. The movable inner ring could be positioned to create any cipher shift you wanted. This was used heavily throughout war. I mean, this was one used in the American Civil War, and honestly, even into World War I, this kind of thing saw a lot of use. It was also very useful in Vigenere ciphers because you could use that without having the tables to quickly create all the different shifts that you needed. Scherbius said, why limit this to just simple shifts? So he created a rotor, which was it was a scrambler that mapped all your keyboard inputs randomly through the rotor, and then on the other side, it would connect to a lamp board where you would see your output letter. The rotor would turn after you pressed a letter, so that way, if you press the same letter twice, you get a different output. This is like Alberti's original polyalphabetic cipher, only with 26 different alphabets. Not satisfied with the complexity of one, he added multiple rotors. They behave like the wheels of a speedometer. So the first one will spin down only when the second one moves past its last state, like this. And then the second rotor continues to tick on its own. So this increases the number of alphabets to 26 by 26, or 676. So he finally settled on 3 rotors and a reflector. And that reflector just bounces the signal back through another channel in the rotor, making the wiring diagram considerably more complex. And then finally, he added a plug board between the keyboard and the rotors, which were used to, the Germans dispatched 6 cables they would use to swap letters, which boosts the number of configurations available tremendously. So you might have figured that the device I'm referring to Scherbius having invented was the Enigma. This didn't catch on in the early 20s when it was first released because of the high price. But by 1925, Germany finally figured out how badly outmatched they were in crypto and started buying these up like gangbusters. So using what I'm going to affectionately refer to as hand-wavy math, by which I mean we're going to trust a math grad student's well-considered white paper for the purpose of discussion, the total number of configuration options is enormous, 3 times 10 to the 114, which is that enormous number there. But the way the Germans actually used it, they didn't use quite so many. They used 10 to the 23 total configurations. Nevertheless, this was an incredibly daunting task to crack, so the Germans weren't crazy to consider Enigma to be unbeatable. But that proved not to be the case. The efforts of a team led by one brilliant mathematician demonstrated Enigma could be broken. And thanks to their work, his government was able to read German communication in the clear less than a day after its transition. Maybe that's not who you were thinking I was talking about. Marian Rejewski was a university student in Poland in the early 30s when the Polish intelligence service recruited him into their crypto program. This was before Hitler was chancellor, so they didn't yet fear their neighbors. They just felt it was prudent to gain a peacetime advantage. Sorry, he comes in later. He found a notch in Enigma's armor, and the first message of the day would contain information on how they were including their rotors. So he was able to develop techniques that allowed them to figure out what their day's configuration were and decrypt those messages inside of 24 hours. By the end of 38, though, Germany, in the preparation for war, increased the number of rotors from that they had available, not the ones they were using. They increased the ones available from 3 to 5. And the cost of the extra equipment would have been 15 times the annual budget of the Polish intelligence service, so they weren't able to do it. So unable to continue, and in the face of of Hitler's now increasingly vitriolic anti-Poland rhetoric, they gifted all of their knowledge to the Allies. And they were astonished because Poland was a decade ahead of all the rest of them in decrypting this. And it was Alan Turing who then, during the war, at Bletchley Park, who devised a way to use crib words, expected phrases in the plain text, to compute the settings going forward. So for instance, the German military had a standard operating procedure to send a weather report just after 6 in the morning. So it was a good bet that the 605 intercept included the word weather. Turing is a rarity among mathematicians. His story is a tragic one that's worth exploring on its own, and I don't have time today to do justice to his tale. The Imitation Game, though, is a worthy effort by Hollywood from last year to do exactly that. So that's an easy takeaway for you today. I highly recommend that. All right, that brings our lightning quick tour of the history of cryptography into the modern age. So in writing this, I wanted to go farther than this, but I found that there's so much material here that this is worthy of its own future talk. So before we go, I want to scratch the surface, if only just very lightly. I want to touch on two families of ciphers in the digital world. The first is the stream cipher. The goal of a stream cipher is to approximate that strength of the one-time pad, but in a way that doesn't actually require real pads. So first what we do is we're going to encode our plain text into ASCII digits and convert those to binary. Then a text key is going to be used to generate a stream of bits, a key stream, from a pseudo-random number generator. That key stream is going to generate the same data every time, every day that you use that same key. So we're going to have it produce some bits, which we're going to combine with plain text bits using the XOR binary operator. That's like our modular letter operation. This is reversible. So if A XOR B equals C, C XOR B equals A. One bit at a time. The next bit from the key stream is XORed with the next bit from the message. So we're doing blocks of 8 here for speed. And I'm using the RC4 cipher from 1987 here, so it's now considered insecure, but it makes for a nice example. To decrypt, the recipient would use the same key to get the same key stream and just repeat the same operation of XORing all those bits, and they get the original. So stream ciphers are very efficient, but block ciphers like AES are where the heavy lifting is done. And here's how those work. You start with a key, not a word key, but a binary one. First, you're going to perform a key expansion round. So this is a function that's going to use the master key K to generate lots of derivative keys. We're going to take our message M, and we're going to perform a round of substitution and transposition operations using K1 to generate M1. We're going to then feed M1 to the next round with K2 to generate M2. And we're going to continue this until finally, after n rounds are complete, the output is the ciphertext. Now, why is this called a block cipher instead of a round cipher? It's because the binary key is only so big, so we can only encrypt so much data at a time. So the message would be carved into blocks of a size matching the cipher's key strength. Each block is then encrypted and finally mashed together to form the final ciphertext. Each block goes through the same number of rounds as it's enciphered. And that's where crypto gets its legendary reputation for being hard and don't roll your own crypto. Because if you do what I just described in the last slide, you have an interesting problem. What happens if some of the blocks in the message have identical chunks of content in them? They end up with the same output. And this might not seem like a big problem at first, but when you look at it another way, you may not be protecting your data very well at all. So this is an image I encrypted using the electronic codebook method, which just does everything in parallel, all the different blocks. And as you can see, I'm a dirty red. Dangerous ideas. This was done using AES, and AES is good crypto, but ECB is bad crypto. So, I mean, the forbidding warning not to mess with crypto is, you know, you can see how this kind of builds up in complexity as we've gotten through time. So there's other modes to encrypt data in series instead, and so the ciphertext from one block would be fed in as an initialization parameter to the next. I have used up all of your time and attention for today. I'm happy to, I have no time for questions, but I'm happy to be chased outside where you can hit me with any questions you have. I thank you all for your attention. Appreciate it.